Good afternoon and welcome to today's Adweek webinar, where we'll be talking about a new way to measure retail media performance. Today's webinar is sponsored by Stackline. I'm Danielle Moore, Senior Manager here with Adweek's Content Studio, and I'll be your host. Before we begin today, I just want to take a second to make sure everyone knows what to expect from today's event and is familiar with the features of our platform here. Today's presentation should go somewhere in the 35 to 40 minute range, after which we will have time for audience Q&A. So if at any point you have a question for one of our speakers today, just use that Q&A tool right beneath the video window on your screen, and we will get to as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. Also, definitely not too late to invite your colleagues to join us at today's event. About 15 minutes ago, you should have received a final reminder email from us, and in there you can find a link to the registration page that you can share with your colleagues. Still plenty of time for them to join us live, but if they can't, do know that today's event is being recorded and they can always catch that on-demand version. In fact, that recording is going to be available to all registrants, and we'll send you a link to that later today when it's available around 3:30 Eastern or so. And if you would like a PDF of today's slides, you can find those in the event resources area right beneath the video window on your screen as well. As always, if you enjoyed today's webinar, definitely check out the full calendar of upcoming events at adweek.com/webinars, also linked below. And also in that event resources area, you can find a link to our resource library where we have new guides, white papers, and other content added regularly. So be sure to check all of that out. Now, let me introduce you to today's speakers. We're happy to be joined by Michael Lagoni, CEO at Stackline. Michael founded Stackline, which builds subscription-based commerce tools and services for thousands of the largest consumer brands, retailers, and professional services firms. Previously, he held data analytics roles at Amazon and Boston Consulting Group. We're also pleased to welcome Greg Wolny, VP of Partnerships at Stackline. Greg oversees partnerships at Stackline, and before joining the company, he worked in various agency leadership roles, most recently leading commerce and activation efforts at Code3. All right, we've got a lot of great content to dive into today, so without further ado, let me bring our speakers up on screen here to get us started. Welcome, Greg and Michael. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll hand it over to you, Greg.
All right, thank you so much, Danielle. Appreciate the introduction. Very excited to be here today. As Danielle mentioned, alongside our founder and CEO, Michael Lagoni. So we're going to get into an overview of a new and different way to measure retail media performance today. We're excited to talk about this multi-retailer attribution tool. You're going to hear Michael and I refer to it as MRA throughout the conversation. So just know that means multi-retailer attribution. So the agenda for today, we're going to get into a little bit of background in terms of the ecosystem that sort of fuels MRA. We're going to tell you how it works. And then we want to get into specific case studies and some of the insights that we're seeing from the early use of this new tool. So that's the plan. Please, as Danielle mentioned, please add any questions you might have throughout the conversation into the chat tool, and then we'll be sure to cover those at the end. So before getting into all of that, though, we think it's important. We want to talk a little bit about Stackline. So, Michael, I'll hand it over to you to give a brief overview of Stackline.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks so much, Danielle and Greg. Really appreciate it. A quick background on Stackline. We're headquartered here in downtown Seattle, but we've got 6 other offices around the world. We work with over 7,000 of the biggest consumer brands and manufacturers today. What's great about our clients is they span sort of every major department, from grocery to pet supplies to apparel and everything in between. So we get a chance to really work with the best and brightest minds in the industry who are always kind of pushing us to invent, the cutting edge solutions for the industry. So it's a very great sort of symbiotic system. And that work that we do supporting, all of our clients has really led us to create the multi-retailer attribution product that we're going to talk a little bit about today. A little bit more about Stackline. We work with and are integrated with about 50 of the biggest retailers around the world in 26 countries as well. And that kind of footprint is always expanding. We've got a really big product portfolio at Stackline. We've got a whole suite of solutions that help brands and manufacturers understand their competitive landscape and market share, understand consumer behavior and shopper analytics, but also automate and operationalize all of the jobs that have to be done every day to operate a consumer brand. Everything from automating your advertising to better predicting your sales forecasts and supply chain and everything in between. And we've won some nice awards along the way.
Yeah, and just to add to that one real quick, Michael. So if you think about what this really means for us in the industry, it really shows how our customers value our insights and the services we provide, and it really helps us innovate on our products and solve some of these challenges that most advertisers, most brands and agencies have been facing. So excited to roll that into the conversation today, really leading from a lot of the feedback we've received from the brands and clients that we work with.
Yeah, yep, absolutely.
Great. So this next section then, what we want to get into is explain a little bit more around the operating system that we're using to fuel our multi-retailer attribution. So Michael's going to take us through the ecosystem here, and we'll learn a little bit more about Shopper OS.
Yeah. And Shopper OS, you can really think of it as that's the platform that the multi-retailer attribution, or MRA, as Greg referenced, is really sort of a branch off of the Shopper OS tree in many ways. And what this ecosystem allows us to do on behalf of our clients is really connect with the end consumer and understand for every consumer, at least in the United States, is where we've launched this technology initially, but we do plan to roll it out globally. In the United States, for consumers, we have 3 to 5 years of all of their purchase history for online retailers, as well as the major brick and mortar retailers as well. So you've got that nice multi-year online and offline view of every consumer and every purchase down to the SKU level. In that ecosystem, so far we've processed about $10 billion in retail sales or transactions. So it gives us a very broad and deep view of retail activity. On the next slide, we'll talk about some of the different retailers that we have included in this ecosystem so far. At this point, we've got 10 of the biggest sort of omni-channel retailers and over 30,000 brick and mortar stores included, and we track over 1 billion unique products. So we wanted to kind of set the stage before we dive into the case studies and the solutions, sort of the work that brands are doing and agencies are doing in this ecosystem, just to give you a sense of sort of the breadth and depth of the data that's really sort of behind the scenes that's powering the MRA solution. This slide here just gives a nice overview on the left of the initial 10 retailers that we have in the ecosystem. So some of the big e-com retailers such as Amazon or Chewy, and then of course the major omni-channel and brick and mortar retailers in the US like Target and Walmart and many others. We've got a nice list on the far right there of many other big retailers that will be coming soon. So we'll constantly be expanding the footprint of this network as well. The benefit of having many different retailers included in this ecosystem from a brand's perspective or an ad agency's perspective is you'll see as we get into the case studies, but ultimately this is going to allow you to understand how are your target consumers sort of behaving across different retailers and across different channels. So you may be reaching a shopper with an ad on Amazon, and maybe they see the ad, maybe they click the ad, maybe they even buy your product there, and that's great. But maybe they don't complete the purchase there. Maybe they see your media and they go and shop and buy your product at a different store, a different retailer, or in a different channel, and that's okay too. Historically, brands haven't been able to really measure that type of activity. And so the benefit of why we're kind of doing this setup up front is we're going to take you through this sort of new playbook that brands can deploy, where you can now understand how your consumers are behaving out there across many different retailers or different channels all at once.
All right, great. So let's jump in to a few of the limitations and challenges that advertisers are seeing today. And again, this is a lot of the feedback we get. These are not new challenges, but I think it's important to sort of point out, some of the different aspects that while advertisers are dealing with it today, tools like our multi-retailer attribution can help solve this. So as advertising, continues to get more and more complex, new KPIs, new metrics, seems like there's always a new retail media network coming out pretty regularly. There's a few challenges that we see come up across all of those. So when we think about proving out the impact of retail media, and in this case, we're going to be focusing in on Amazon, we can draw a line today from an Amazon ad placement to a sale on Amazon, as Michael was just alluding to. And this single line of attribution can be helpful, but as brands continue to expand on the other retailers that you see on screen, that single retailer limitation really becomes a barrier, becomes a blind spot to proving out the impact of that advertising. So we want to solve for the attribution limits. The second one listed here, when you think about another critical component of proving out, the impact of an advertising investment, it really comes back to understanding from a first-party data standpoint. And while this is a very valuable asset to brands and to manufacturers, most brands and manufacturers have very limited visibility into first-party data. There was recently a survey of large CPG brands that showed they had collected less than 1% of first-party data across their consumer set. And a lot of that came from their D2C channels. So with most of the transactions occurring on these retailers, without having visibility into that, they really struggle to effectively understand the consumer journey and really where their dollars are going. And finally, just sort of wrapping up the other challenge on this slide here, it's this idea of the incomplete data. If you think about, sitting in a meeting today as you're planning your retail media strategy, you're talking to the brand teammates that you work with, or you're an agency working with the brand, you're not always operating, actually you hardly ever are operating with a complete data set, unified analytics from a first-party perspective to what's happening across all of these retailers. So we've really worked hard to deliver a more complete, unified data set that covers this multi-retailer attribution. So again, wanted to highlight these challenges and sort of what we're solving for as we think about our MRA technology.
Yeah, that's a great point. In many ways, over the past decade, building Stackline and helping our clients every day, one of our sort of internal little mantras at Stackline has always been, our job is to solve our clients' hardest problems, right? We're here to solve the hardest problems in retail. And that's one thing I've always really appreciated about our MRA team and just the initiative overall, is that this is one of the biggest problems in retail and has been for a very, very long time. And that's why we put, such a incredible amount of, team and talent and resources behind it.
All right, great. So let's look then at specifically how this works. So we've set up the problem, we've set up the challenges, and sort of the ecosystem we're pulling from to solve this. So let's dive into a walkthrough of specifically how this can impact that full retailer view.
Yeah, sounds great. So to walk you through just a basic example, and we'll get into some of the live case study, examples shortly thereafter. But right up front, the way of thinking about this system is, first, a consumer sees one of your ads. That could be a sponsored search ad, sponsored products. Maybe it's a commercial on Thursday Night Football. We're going to look at a lot of Amazon examples today. So any type of ad or media that you have running on the Amazon ecosystem, that first step is that consumer sees or clicks and engages with that piece of content or media. The next step that often happens is those consumers go and purchase or explore or learn about your products at other retailers in the days that follow, right? So over that next 14-day attribution window, even though the consumer may have seen your ad on Thursday Night Football or clicked your ad on Amazon, 2 days later, they find themselves walking the aisle of a brick and mortar retailer, such as Target or Walmart or Kroger or something like that, and deciding to actually buy your brand's product physically at that other store, other retailer. And again, to go back to that data set that we referenced right up front, for those consumers, we've got access to 3 to 5 years of all their purchase history down at the SKU level and store level, et cetera. So that's really the data set that comes into play. And then ultimately what we're able to do here in this final step is the partnership that we have with Amazon, through utilizing the clean room technology and Amazon Marketing Cloud, we're able to sort of match that data set together, right? Where we can match the consumers who saw or clicked your ads on the Amazon ecosystem, and then we match it with this multi-retailer and multi-channel set of consumer level purchase history. So that's one nice aspect that clients have really, asked for over the years, is they don't want a model or, some fancy math to sort of predict what the sales impact was. They want deterministic data. They want to know that this one consumer saw the ad here and then went and bought my product physically at a store 2 days later. And they want that to be a very, very deterministic data set that they can put a lot more faith in ultimately, as opposed to, I think some of the legacy ways of getting at this is more probabilistic, trying to estimate what you think the sales impact may have been from a piece of content or media. Whereas with this new system, this new partnership we have with Amazon is very deterministic based. And it's literally about that consumer and that purchase of that one product or transaction.
Yeah, and I would add in there, Michael, I think as we continue to see platforms and retailers like Amazon expand the opportunity for advertising offsite, we immediately run into this challenge of understanding the impact of that advertising. So working with Amazon as they make those new advertising ad types available, and then being able to prove it out, it certainly gives us a lot to test and a lot to manage. And we're starting to see that as we get into some of these case studies. We'll show you that specifically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So this first one we want to jump into, this is very much focused on, sort of the main premise of this tool is understanding that incremental offsite impact across multiple retailers. And as we go through this, you can start to see sort of the first version of understanding your Amazon advertising impact, where you're understanding just what happens on Amazon.com. And now we're going to be able to see, as we lay that out across multiple retailers where a brand's products are available, you can actually see the impact across all of those as well. So, Michael, I'll hand it over to you for this first case study.
Great. Yeah, this first set of data shows, I would say, the traditional retail media metrics that most brands and agencies are accustomed to getting. So for this particular client, it's a big CPG company. Over that period, they spent $18 million advertising on Amazon across search, display, streaming TV, Thursday Night Football. In total, they spent $18 million. Amazon, who's the retailer of record, then reported on every campaign every day, like, okay, here's the sales attribution that we see. And from that $18 million in spend, of the consumers who engage with that content or that media and then went and bought a product on Amazon, they generated $49 million in sales. So ultimately, this client generated a $2.71 ROAS. If you limit it to just the consumers who made that immediate point of purchase on the Amazon platform, okay? And this has been the way that the entire retail industry has measured advertising results over the past decade, ultimately. But we all have known over the past decade that there's this other activity occurring, right? The consumers who maybe saw those ads or clicked those ads on Amazon, maybe they didn't buy the product there. Maybe they went to Kroger the next day or Target the day after that, and they bought the product off the shelf. So we've all known and had this sort of theory or hypothesis that there's this multi-retailer impact, but no one could ever really measure it before. And so here's the data set that we're now bringing, to the table alongside Amazon is for this exact same client. So this is the exact same case study. If you look at the consumers who clicked those $18 million in ads, but went and bought the products at other retailers outside of Amazon. So we kind of reference this as the off Amazon activity. That brand, that manufacturer generated $114 million in additional sales that happened at Target and Walmart and Kroger and other retailers in the days that followed after the customers, clicked the Amazon ads. So now this is all of a sudden a very different story where the brand goes from thinking like, okay, I'm getting a $2.71 ROAS that may be good, maybe not based on other benchmarks or other alternatives, but now with a more complete picture of the real sales impact that these campaigns drove, again, at a deterministic level. This is at an individual consumer level and the individual purchase and SKU that they bought. You can now see the real story and the real impact that this media was driving. To take it a little bit further, though, we can now even break this out by retailer. So in this example, you can see that $64 million of the sales occurred at Walmart after the customers clicked the ads on Amazon. So kind of interesting to see that consumer behavior, right? Where maybe they were doing some research on Amazon that morning, but that afternoon they ended up in a Walmart store and they remembered the product or they remembered the brand and they went and found it, in the aisle. Amazon is actually the second biggest beneficiary in terms of sales. So kind of interesting, right? Even Amazon themselves, they're the ones running the ads in the media, and that's where the engagement is occurring with the consumer. They're only getting the second best amount of sales compared to the other retailers here. And then, of course, Kroger and Target did fairly well as well, getting up over $20 million each in sales attribution from those client campaigns. To take it a little bit further, this is an anonymized case study, obviously. So the client we're talking about here is a big sort of multi-brand company. And so along the x-axis, you can see the different brands that they own that were a part of the $18 million in ad spend, and their products were featured in those campaigns. What this chart shows very visually is of all the ad attributed sales that occurred on Amazon, but also at other retailers, what percent of those sales occurred at each of the major retailers, right? So if you look at Amazon is in the darker sort of bottom color there. Certain brands, Amazon captured about 40 to 50% of the total sales. But then many brands like sub-brand number 4 there, the vast majority of sales that occurred were actually at non-Amazon retailers, right? In that example, 92% of the sales attribution happened off of the Amazon platform. So it really does vary a bit from category to category or brand to brand. Much of this difference is driven by that particular brand's product distribution. Like, where do they have the most products available, and at what store locations? That can really drive quite a bit of the difference here. The other way that we looked at the data for this particular client is, did the amount of retail sales that you generated from each shopper increase as those consumers engage with more media? So what this chart really highlights is it isolated down to the group of consumers that watched Thursday Night Football commercials that featured this client's products. And what you see here on the far left is how much money did your typical active consumer who was already buying products from the brand. So this is really a measure of incrementality ultimately at the consumer level. We looked at, well, how much money did those consumers spend buying products from that brand in the 14 days before they saw the first Thursday Night Football commercial? So it was $8 was the average. And then on the 2 bar chart to the right-hand side, you can see, well, once consumers began seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, or even 11 or more, it sounds like what we watch in my household on Thursday nights, 11 or more Thursday Night Football commercials featuring this particular brand, they tended to spend, more and more dollars on that brand. About a 37% lift in retail sales per active consumer after seeing the commercial. So it's kind of a really neat way of understanding, not only are we acquiring more customers, but are we making more dollars? Are we generating more retail sales per consumer, even when you isolate it to consumers that were already active and already loyal, to this brand? Are we able to sort of monetize those consumers at a higher level now? A completely different way to take a look at the impact of these exact same campaigns is we looked at something a little bit higher in the funnel, which is search volume. We realize with higher funnel media, such as commercials on Thursday Night Football, you've got a consumer who's sitting in their living room and they're in the middle of, watching the Pittsburgh Steelers game. They may not see the commercial and hop right up and drive to the store, right? They're going to stay there and finish the game. But if that piece of content, if that commercial really resonates with them, the most logical next step for that consumer is they're going to pull out their phone and search for that brand. They're going to type in the brand name or type in the name of the product, into the Amazon search bar or the Walmart app search bar or whatever it is, right? And part of this technology is we measure all consumer search across every search bar on every retail site down to the keyword level. So what you're able to do here is sort of take all of the hundreds and hundreds of branded keywords that are relevant for that particular brand that was featured in the advertisement, and we just sum up what's the total search volume on the internet for that brand in that period. And if you kind of study this chart, this is a brand that had a huge surge, about 130% increase year over year in the search volume for that brand in the months of October, November, and December. And that was obviously the period, where the Thursday Night Football commercials were running. So this is a different type of metric that sits a little bit higher in the funnel, but I think also allows you to see more of an immediate response. Like, are the ads, are the commercials resonating, with consumers enough to where they're actually taking out their phone and searching for the brand on the internet? And it's such a good sort of early signal of how well that media is going to perform for you.
Yeah, and I would say also think about the sort of the planning impact from these results as you go through and understand not only, the effect of the ads that you're buying and, frequency and all of those really important metrics that Michael walked through, but also think about the next, tentpole event or the next time, you're going to plan for Prime Day or Q4 holiday to have this level of insight and be able to not only allocate your budget accordingly, but also think about it from a product placement perspective across multiple retailers. So the sort of the length you can go with all of these learnings is just continues to go on and on. So excited to get into the next one here. So if we jump ahead, where the first one sort of looked at the true multi-retailer impact, we wanted to dig a little deeper with a number of the brands that we've worked with, and this one specifically, we want to look at the new to brand metric. So Amazon's got the new to brand metric. Again, this is a metric that we can see new to brand consumers specifically within Amazon, but we wanted to look at that across this same analysis. So Michael, go ahead and jump in on the new to brand impact across retailers.
Absolutely. I think that, over the past 4 or 5 years, as the new to brand metric has really come onto the scene here in the retail industry, it's been, I think, a mixed metric. In some ways, the brands and the agencies are excited to have this type of data about, okay, I ran this campaign, I generated $100,000 in sales, 48% was new to brand as reported, by any individual retailer. But there's always been a little bit of unknown behind that metric because, if in this example, a client or a brand was running media and advertising on the Amazon platform, and the new to brand metric from Amazon reported that 48% of the consumers that you acquired from that campaign were new to brand, which sounds really good. But what I think most brands know is that under the surface, those consumers may be buying that brand for the first time on Amazon, but maybe in previous months and previous years, they were buying that brand already from Kroger, Target, Best Buy, other retailers. So for that one retailer, which is Amazon in this case, they're new to brand, but that consumer may have been loyal to that brand for decades potentially, right? So they're not really new to brand. They're just shifting or switching the channel that they're buying in. Well, with the MRA technology, we can now show every brand truly how many consumers were new to brand from that campaign. Because again, if you think about the data set that's under the surface here, we can see that consumer made your purchase or bought your product on Amazon after clicking your ad, but we've got 3 to 5 years of their purchase history from every other retailer. So we're able to truly go back and see, all right, have they been buying from you from other stores before or not? And are they truly, a net new customer to your brand, not just at that one retailer? So in this example, one of the big CPG brands, the metrics they had reported was that 48% of the customers were new to brand on Amazon. But if you look at it from a multi-retailer perspective over many years, we find that 27% were truly new to brand if you sort of fan out the data set across the entire retail ecosystem. So that's still really, really good. Even in that most extreme measure, across every major online and offline retailer, 27% of the customers were still truly first-time acquisitions for the brand. So I think that that was still a very exciting, data set for the client. To take it a little bit further, we then could look at, of the customers who clicked your Amazon ad, but then made a purchase at any of the other major retailers, we can then look at new to brand at each retailer too. So as we saw on the previous page, 27% of the customers were new to brand from a multi-retailer perspective, buying on Amazon. But then you can also see, for example, the customers at Kroger, of all the consumers who clicked our Amazon ad and then bought the product at Kroger the next day, only 12.9% of those customers were truly, new to brand and new acquisitions for that particular manufacturer. So I think that this is also helpful to understand, are your Amazon ads driving incremental new customer acquisitions at other retailers in addition to their own? To take it a slightly different perspective, you can look at these exact same metrics, and this is summing up all the various retailers combined. I think the overall average new to brand was about 21% across all retailers, but it varied quite a bit by ad type. So on the far left, you can see that sponsored search ads actually drove the most incremental new to brand customers across all retailers. At 24%. So it's also interesting to look at it at the campaign level too. Another way to kind of view those new customers, coming into the brand, for any brand or manufacturer, you can look at sort of the acquisition flow. So if you've got, to keep the math simple for me here, if you've got 100 customers in America who have actively purchased from your brand from any retailer or channel this year, at this particular brand, we can see that 57.8% of their shoppers were retained from previous years, meaning that they're not new to brand. They have been buying from the brand for previous years. 42% of their customers are truly net new and first-time buyers of the brand this year. But there's really sort of a difference between those new customers. Some of those customers are new and switching in, meaning that they might be new to this brand, but they've been buying in this category for a long time. They've just been buying from competitive brands. So we refer to those new customers as the switch-in customer type because they're really switching into your brand for the first time. The other 14% of customers here are category entrants. So they're new to your brand, but they're also new to the whole category. They weren't buying from any competitor before. So it's kind of nice to see those differences. If you really double-click in to the switch-in customer, sometimes those are the most interesting because you're able to see, all right, those are the shoppers we're successfully conquesting the competition. We're successfully sort of taking shoppers from the other peer brands that we're up against in that market. And what this chart really highlights is you can even see what is the source, what's the acquisition source. So of those switch-in customers, you can see 44% of them were previously buying from the Great Value brand in that category. And 29% were buying Betty Crocker, or 28% were buying from the Jell-O brand. So you're really able to specify what products were those new customers buying before we successfully won them over and switched them into our brand.
Yeah, I think that just speaks to the level of granularity we're getting into with this tool. It's not just saw an ad and converted somewhere else. Getting into metrics like new to brand, the switch in and the switch out, it's so critical when you think about those questions that you have to answer as you put forth a strategy for your, not only your budget allocation, but your plan for tentpole events and for the rest of the year in this case. So love the granularity we get into. This last case study goes a little bit deeper across some additional insights just across the shopper journey, things like lifetime value, ad type, and frequency. So we'll round out with this last case study, and then we'll have a few minutes left for questions. So Michael, go ahead.
Great. So this case study, we'll kick it off. It was very similar to the first one, a different brand, different set of categories and departments here. But this client, they spent $28 million on Amazon advertising, and that generated $76 million in ad attributed sales on Amazon for just over a $2 ROAS. So very similar to what we saw with the first case study. When we layered in all of the off Amazon purchases, so those consumers who clicked the Amazon ad, but then bought it at Kroger or Best Buy the next day, we can see that drove an incremental $112 million in sales over that 14-day kind of attribution period for over a $6 ROAS. So a very different story from a sort of a profitability perspective for this brand. Here, of course, we can view, well, where did those other sales occur? You've got Amazon, which actually in this case led the list of retailers in terms of capturing those sales from immediate response perspective. But then it was followed by Walmart and Target, who also benefited in a pretty big way from those Amazon ads. A couple of other metrics that we haven't really touched on a whole lot is the ability to view the ROAS from a multi-retailer perspective, where the metrics in the darker color here, like if you look at brand number 1, again, this client was a multi-brand company. And for the very first brand in their portfolio, they generated a $3.63 ROAS on Amazon purchases. But when you layer in the consumers who went and bought that brand's products from other retailers, you can see that the ROAS was truly, over $11. So not only can you view the performance by ad type and by retailer, but even at the brand level, being able to understand like what was the real ROAS for that particular brand is very helpful, because oftentimes inside these companies, ad budgets and ad budget allocations are decided by the brand teams. And so for them, they're really going to want to understand, okay, well, what was the particular performance of like just my one brand out of the portfolio? So things like this will be helpful. Here, of course, you can take a look at the sales impact across every retailer. Like we've seen, they're kind of separated by the different colors there. But probably the newer metric is we showed this chart based on the ad type. And so it's really interesting to see that for this particular client, for their sponsored search ads, Amazon captured about 47.9% of all the sales that occurred. But take a look at streaming TV. For any of their streaming TV ads on Amazon, the sales that occurred as a result, only 17% of those happened on Amazon, right? The other 83% happened at Walmart, Target, Kroger, and some of the other big, omni-channel retailers. A couple of other ways to kind of think about these metrics in this particular case study is really looking at the lifetime value impact of the media, because it also varies quite a bit from retailer to retailer. So for this exact same client, we were able to see, all right, when they acquire a customer at a particular retailer, how much money does their average customer spend on that brand over the next 52 weeks, right? So we look at sort of the annual lifetime value. It's really the 52-week retail sales per consumer that you acquire into your brand. And you can see that the lifetime value really varies quite a bit from retailer to retailer here. When the client acquires customers on Amazon, they typically spend $16 to $17 per year buying that brand's products over multiple purchases. Walmart has really improved the lifetime value up to almost $20. And then you've got Target, which also has improved quite a bit, going from $9 to $12 year over year. And so this customer lifetime value data set by retailer is also helpful, because you want to understand, all right, if I'm now using these different ad campaigns to acquire customers at other retailers, you want to know how much each of those customers is truly worth to your brand, because it does vary quite a bit from retailer to retailer. And then the last kind of cut of the data here, and then we'll get into just the key takeaways and next steps, is how did the retail sales per customer grow as those shoppers saw a higher frequency of ads? And so similar to that Thursday Night Football example we talked about at the beginning, your average active customer with that brand was spending about $13 on average in the period before. But then after they began to see and engage with the ads, those same customers began spending, between $19 and up to $30 based on the frequency of ads that they saw. So again, kind of a really helpful data set for you to understand not only the multi-retailer impact, but what happens to the customer lifetime value if they continue to see more, ad engagement from your particular brand. And then I'll kind of close it out here with some of the key takeaways, but I'd love to turn it over to the Q&A section too. I think that we were able to really hit most of these key highlights. Just to recap, I think that for the first time ever in the retail industry, the brands and ad agencies alike are now able to measure in a very clear, concrete, and deterministic way what is sort of the Amazon impact across all of the major retailers and channels where your products are sold. And the fact we were able to really see the sales impact driven by some of the higher funnel media, right? Like the Thursday Night Football commercials. That's been a big question in the retail industry for decades now is, what is the real ROI on media like that? And now you can measure it, down to the brand, down to the retailer, across the entire ecosystem. I think that data like that is really transforming, even in these early months since we've launched this new technology, how brands and agencies are collectively making budget allocation decisions. Now that you can shine a spotlight on the performance by brand, by retailer, by channel, by campaign type in a whole new way, it's really sort of a whole new set of information that you can use to strategize internally. The three key takeaways on the far right-hand side, I think, are just as valuable. And where this is all going next is this next phase is where brands are going to be able to understand the unique performance of unique audiences that they're targeting, right? So you can slice and dice the, consumer base that you're reaching with your ads or you're trying to grow your sales or market share with, and analyze within each sub-audience what is the multi-retailer impact that you're driving with every audience, what's the share of voice, what's the market share, what's the sales of every cohort and every audience of customers, but then more importantly too, how do you target those customers in more personalized ways and keep driving more relevant media with each sub-audience. So I think that's really where we're going to be going next and where the industry is headed next. I'm pretty excited about it. But at this point, I'd love to turn it over to any questions that may have come in.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for those insights. Lots to discuss there. As you mentioned, we do have time to take a few questions from our audience today. Our audience members, please know that if we don't get to your question today, we always make sure they get forwarded over to our speakers so they have the opportunity to possibly reply offline. Just a couple of quick reminders from Adweek here. Today's webinar has been recorded and an on-demand link will be sent out later today around 3:30 Eastern, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. And if you would like a copy of today's slides, you can find those in the event resources area right beneath the video window on your screen. All right, let's jump into some of this Q&A. So our first question here, do you foresee expanding multi-retailer ad attribution to measure the impact of other retail media network advertising, e.g. Walmart, Instacart, etc.?
Absolutely. I don't know, Greg, do you want to take the first one or do you want me to?
For sure. No, I can jump in on that one. I think as we mentioned throughout the presentation today, our focus has been on our partnership with Amazon building this out initially. As you can see, some of the metrics and some of the findings, obviously this does have applications against these other retail media networks. So as we continue to grow the tool and the impacts, expansion across other retailers will likely happen.
Makes perfect sense. Anything to add there, Michael?
No, I think that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, where we want to take the technology is helping brands and agencies really understand all of their advertising and marketing investments and the true and final impact, that occurs everywhere where they sell their products. So yeah, we're excited about how big, that vision is and how helpful it will be for our clients.
All right, so our next question here. How do you see brand leaders using these types of multi-retailer ad insights? Obviously, you presented some sort of anonymized case studies today, but would love to hear a little bit more about the brand leader perspective.
Yeah, well, maybe I can jump in first, Greg, but feel free to jump in if I miss anything critical here. But I think, the first phase is, I think, just answering these big questions that have been in the industry for 10 years. Of like, what is the real complete sales impact that these ads are driving across retailers and channels, and how is my investments on Amazon helping me hit my sales goals at other retailers or hit my market share goals at other channels? And I think now, for the first time ever, the industry now can see that and has the answer. I think the second phase is where we're entering into now with some of our clients who we've been working with, and earlier with this, is how do we use this information to change our strategy and reallocate ad budgets to different platforms, or reallocate ad budgets across different types. Maybe historically a brand hasn't wanted to spend a lot on streaming TV or certain higher funnel types of media because they were unsure of the sales impact. But now that they can see it and measure it, they're now informed to sort of make a better decision ultimately of how maybe they're going to reallocate the dollars that they have towards certain campaign types. The kind of third phase that I highlighted a little bit on some of the key takeaways is, how do you continue to use this data to better understand your consumers and understand who are your consumers and what are the personas and audience types that are buying your products today? How big are each of those audiences out there in the retail economy? And then how do you really measure the performance, not only of just your brand, like what is your brand sales or market share, but how do you understand your performance audience by audience? I really think that's the future of how brands are going to sort of measure themselves, is if they've got 10 different key persona types or 10 different key audience types that they're trying to win, they're going to measure their sales, their market share, their customer lifetime value, all of these wonderful things at the audience level. And then why that fits nicely into this future state that the industry is headed towards is because in order to win and really stand out as a brand, you have to make sure that you deeply, deeply know who your target personas and audiences are, because you need to create products that resonate with them. You have to create media that engages those people and speaks to their needs and preferences. But then you have to create wonderful shopping experiences and brand stores and PDPs and landing pages and videos that resonate, with that very, very specific audience in a more personalized way. And that level of sophistication, as opposed to sort of mass marketing that has been done, I think is really going to define, the winning brands of the future, who can use their dollars more efficiently. And, this type of approach really is going to support, the direction that brands really want to go.
Well said. Appreciate the thoroughness of that response. Our next question here: for brands with a strong direct-to-consumer presence, could this approach be expanded to also look at impact and attribution there?
I don't know, Greg, do you want to take that or for me?
That one's all you. Go right ahead. I saw you perk up as that question was asked. So.
Oh yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, well, absolutely. I think that especially for brands that have a large or even a mid-sized direct-to-consumer business, if they've got a Shopify site and they're generating a decent amount of sales through that particular channel that they own, absolutely. I think that in many ways is the number one question they have is, okay, I know I just acquired this shopper from a Facebook ad and they came to my brand.com website and they placed one order, but then we never heard from that consumer again. And they never came back to our website ever again after that one transaction. Where did they go? What else did they switch to a competitor? Or maybe they're still buying our brand's products, but they're just buying the products on Amazon now or at Walmart stores now. And so the questions there are just as big, if not bigger. And this type of technology and this solution, answers those exact same questions for them too.
Yeah, I would just add in there on that, this is a question that's come up a lot with the brands we've worked with so far. And it comes back to the question of sort of where does the D2C site sit within the importance of their different properties and where they're ultimately selling their product. I think can be dependent on category. It's dependent on, where else they're spending. So the answer is absolutely yes. I just think it's for each individual brand to sort of determine where D2C fits into their overall strategy.
Awesome. Thanks for those insights. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for questions today. But as I mentioned earlier, we'll make sure we get any we didn't get answered live today forwarded over to our speakers. I'd like to thank our speakers as well as our sponsor, Stackline. Some final reminders here from Adweek. Make sure you download those slides from the event resources area and be sure to check your email for a link to the on-demand recording, which will be out later today. As always, if you enjoyed today's webinar, be sure to check out the full calendar of events at adweek.com/webinars. Again, huge thank you to Michael and Greg for joining us live today and for letting us pick your brains on this Q&A session. Thank you also to our audience for joining us live. And as always, we look forward to seeing everyone on an upcoming Adweek webinar. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.